Today is July 31st, 2011, and we are in the home of World War II veteran and now retired Lieutenant Colonel Robert Wiley in Aurora, Colorado. I'm Dave Barrett, and I will be conducting the interview. Terry Hagee is behind the camera. Terry and I are part of the American Patriots History Association. Good afternoon, Bob.
Hi.
Where were you born, Bob?
Wiggins, Colorado. That's about 60 miles northeast of Denver.
And when?
September 4, 1924.
Where were you when you heard about the attack on Pearl Harbor?
As I recall, I was in the hospital in Sioux City, Iowa, recovering from a tonsillectomy.
And what was your initial reaction to the bombing?
Oddly enough, I had very little reaction. I didn't really have the big picture. I was, let's see, I would have been, 16 or 17 years old at the time, and world politics and war and this sort of thing were really of not great concern to me.
So in the aftermath of the attack, what did you do?
Well, then I started learning a little bit about it, and I thought that Guadalcanal was probably down near the Panama Canal someplace, and I started learning a little bit more, but of course by then I was a senior in high school, and you know, with working and school and all of that sort of thing, really I didn't have a whole lot of time to be thinking about the war. That's not a very patriotic attitude, I guess, but I was just a normal teenager growing up, and I didn't know anyone who was in the service or anyone who had gone, because my dad had died when I was 9, and I just didn't think that much about it.
Now, you weren't age eligible to enter the military yet, so
No.
what did you do for the next year?
Well, in 42, I became eligible. See, this was in December of 41, and then I finished high school in 42, and the fall of 42, September, I became 18 and became eligible, and as that time approached, I became much more interested in what was happening.
Were you working at this point?
When
you
I
finished school.
When I got out of high school in June, I went to work in Cudahy Packing Company, and I worked there until they found out I was only 17 and got fired, and then I went to work at Sue B. Honey, and that fall, with a couple $100 in my pocket, I left to go to Iowa State Teachers College in Cedar Falls, Iowa, and when I turned 18 in September, I registered for the draft in Black Hawk County Selective Service Office.
And did they induct you right away after you registered?
No, I registered when I turned 18, and then I was in school, in college, and I was not drafted until May of 43. And it was very interesting because when I was drafted, I had not taken my finals for the last semester of that school, and I was a little bit upset, so I went to the Dean of Men, and a little bit of a tear and a little bit of flag waving, I said, this is not fair that I go to all of this work and study and everything, then get drafted to serve my country, and I don't get credit for it. So he said, okay, I'll give you any credit that your professors will give you. So he gave me a list, and I went around, and they all graded me with what they thought I should get, except for one history professor that he and I had knocked heads when I first got in his class, and he said, he had a bibliography, and he said, I want a book report on one of these every week. And I said, Professor, I don't have time. I'm working 40 hours. I'm carrying 16 hours of studies, and I just don't have time. He said, Mr. Wiley, you will. And I said, Professor, I will not. And he decided that in spite of the fact that I'd gotten good grades in every test and every quiz and answered everything in class, that he would be very generous and give me a D, which kind of upset me, but I've never forgiven him.
So you at least got credit for that first year.
Yes, I got full credit for the first year of college.
Okay. And you were ultimately inducted in May of
May-
43?
May 7th, no,
17th.
is he 20, no, May 14th.
Okay.
I had to figure back because my retirement orders had 17 days and I retired on the 31st of the month, so I must have been inducted on the 14th.
And where was that?
That was in Camp Dodge in Des Moines, Iowa, which, interestingly enough, was where my dad had been discharged after World War I, about, 25 years earlier.
Where did you go for your basic training?
Camp Joseph T. Robinson, Arkansas. And half of the base at that time was medics and half was infantry. And I happened to have been drafted into the medics, and the only medics I knew were the guys that had taken my blood pressure and given me the shots. And I thought, well, maybe this is a pretty good way to spend the war, working in a dispensary. But we took all of our basic training, and we ran all the obstacle courses and all of the bellying under wire with machine guns going over the top of you and running the obstacle courses. But in addition to running the obstacle courses and rolling bandages, we also ran medic obstacle courses, which is carrying a litter, a guy about my size, over the various obstacles. And one day I asked Lieutenant Murphy, a name I'll always remember, I said, well, what are they training us for? He says, you're going to be a company aid man. I said, what does that mean? He said, that means that you'll be assigned to an infantry company, and where you go, they'll go. Or where they go, you go. And I said, well, when do we go to the other side of the base and get our small arms training? And he said, no, you don't do that. He said, you just have a red cross on your helmet, and that's it. And that really didn't appeal to me. Get shot at and not shooting back, that didn't make a lot of sense. So I said, well, how do you get out of this? And he said, you can't. Being a young, brash private, didn't know that you questioned officers. I said, sir, I don't believe that. And he was kind of shocked, but he just turned around and left. And about 3 days later, he came back and he said, well, Wiley, there are ways that you can get out of the medics. He said, you can go to aircrew training, or you can go to OCS, you can go to ASTP, which was a Army specialized training program that trained clerks and dental hygienists and all of that stuff, or you can go to the paratroopers. So I went back to my tent and I sat on the bunk and I thought, well, officers make more money than enlisted men, and flying officers make more money than ground officers. So first I'll apply for aircrew training, that doesn't work, I'll apply for OCS. If that doesn't work, I'll apply for ASTP, and if that doesn't work, I'll go to the paratroopers. But I wasn't going to get shot at and not shoot back. And I was very fortunate that I was accepted for aircrew training.
There was more money.
Oh yes. Well, when all of my buddies shipped out, when our basic was over, my orders had not yet come through. And for about, I don't know, maybe a week or two, I was on KP one day and guard duty the next day, and KP and guard duty, and KP and guard duty. Well, the orders finally came through, and I was shipped to Shepherd Field, Texas, where I joined all of the other GIs who were in the cadet training program, became an aviation cadet, and got a 50% increase in my pay, clear up to $75 a month. So I was pretty much in hog heaven at that time.
Now, how did you find the training? Was this kind of a foreign area for you?
Oh, no, you
As an air cadet?
No. We went from Shepherd Field. They assigned us to Montana State. I don't know whether it was a college or a university at that time, and we studied math and physics and other things, and we were there for about 6 months. And we did have a few military duties. One was standing guard duty, and if you ever look in the dictionary under cold, you will see a picture of an aviation cadet with a carbine guarding the flagpole at Montana State in the middle of the winter, because that is cold. But we did a great job, and nobody ever stole the flagpole. So we were happy about that. And one other thing, we had our first orientation flight in a Piper Cub, and something that I always remembered after that is the instructor. He did some stalls and he did a spin or two and so forth, and then he trimmed the airplane into a slight climb, and he says, "Okay, Wiley, take your hands and feet off the controls." And then he took his hands and feet off the controls, and the Cub continued to climb for a little while, and then it kind of went off on a wing and went down. But as it gathered up speed, it kind of came back up, and it was kind of like a fallen leaf. And the instructor says, "You see, Wiley, the airplane can fly. You just have to tell it where to fly. And if you grab the stick too hard, you know that you're over controlling." He said, "You can fly it with your fingers." And I remember that I remember it till today.
You mentioned the cold a minute ago.
Was it ever?
And you also told me a story about one of your officers who you thought taught you something about being a good officer, and also used the cold to kind of make a lesson for some of the other comrades.
That's very true. Lieutenant Franklin, another of the very few officers that I remember his name. Like I say, we did this flying, so we were given flying boots which come most of the way up your calf, and then we had overcoats that came down almost to the top of the flying boots. And when we had reveille in the morning, everyone would fall out and have their overcoats and their flight boots on. some of the guys wanted to cut the corner a little bit and sleep somewhat past reveille, so they would stay in bed until they sounded assembly. Then they'd get up, put on their overcoat, button it to the top, button it all the way down, put on their flight boots and cap, and go out, and they were in formation. And all of the reports were made. All prisoner accounted for, sir. All prisoner accounted for, sir. And when all of the reports were done, Lieutenant Franklin told the platoon leader, he said, Sergeant, have the men take off their coats. And the sergeant says, sir, and he said, have the men remove their coats. And so he turned around, faced the guys, kind of went like this, and it says, by the numbers, remove coats. 1, everyone unbuckled it, unbuttoned the coat. 2, and they took them all off. These half a dozen or a dozen guys out of the 100 that were there standing in their skivvies. And Lieutenant Franklin waited maybe 5 seconds, possibly a little bit more. He says, you can dismiss the men. And he never, ever said a word about it. Never gave anyone a demerit, never did anything, but he had made his point. And from then on, everybody was dressed every morning at assembly. I thought, that is a good officer. I like him.
Okay, so while you're in school up in Montana, the objective is to teach you now to become, do you actually begun specializing as a navigator at this point?
No,
Not yet.
it was just liberal arts education.
Okay. So what was the next step then in the training process?
Okay, from there, like I say, we were there, as I recall, about 6 months, and then we went down to Santa Ana, California, which is what they called a classification center. And there we took every known test devised by men, as far as I'm concerned. An intellectual test, physical tests, physical training, dexterity training, you name it, we did it. And lots of calisthenics and so forth, and we took all of these. And then everyone was classified as either a pilot or a navigator or a bombardier. And one of our friends worked in the orderly room, which is kind of another name for a headquarters. And he saw the list of what men were going to what school, and so forth, and he came back and told us. And I was classified as a navigator. And I thought, no. At that time, I was qualified for all 3, pilot, navigator, and bombardier. So when they assembled us all and called out the assignments, they had an officer up here who was calling out the names of the bombardiers and the navigators and the pilots. So since I was qualified as a pilot, I'm listening over here to them call out the name of pilots. And pretty soon the officer who's calling out the navigators